Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Blue Line the Podcast, a podcast created for and aimed at all members of law enforcement. I'm Brittani Schroeder, editor of Blue Line magazine. Today, I'm joined by Dwayne Zacharie, chief peacekeeper of the Kahnawake Mohawk Peacekeepers in Quebec. Dwayne is the current vice president of the Quebec Association of First Nations and Inuit Police Directors and is a past president of the First Nations Chiefs of Police Association. Today, we're going to be speaking about the unique role of First Nations police services and the landmark decision made by the Supreme Court of Canada on the Mashuash Police Service. Thank you so much for joining me today, Dwayne.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I'm really excited to have this conversation. And to start us off, I'd actually love to hear your story. I'd love to hear what motivated you to choose a life in policing and peacekeeping and what your journey has been like since you made that choice.
No, thank you for that. So I've been working for the Kahnawake Peacekeepers since 1997. I've actually been in the role of chief peacekeeper since 2004. So I'm about to start off on my 21st year of being the chief of this service. And I mean, for me, I started or wanted to become a peacekeeper because I wanted to be able to help people in my community. And I know, many people say that, but really and truly, you know, um, there's a stigma that's attached to policing. And in many dealings or many stories that I've heard from community members, their dealings with other police, it always left them kind of wanting more and they were never satisfied. And for me, I thought, this is something I really want to do. I'd love to do something that's in service to my community. And this is kind of where I kind of set my mark on. And as a little boy in my community growing up, the area in the community where I was living, it just so happened that the chief peacekeeper at the time lived like up the road from me, and the assistant chief lived, a couple of doors down. So I was always kind of around it, and my father was in the military, so you know, uniforms and that kind of thing was always something that interested me. And of course, when I finally got the opportunity, I took a chance, and here I am.
That's fantastic. And I'm sure you never looked back.
No, not at all. Like I don't regret it for a second. I mean, it hasn't always been, sunshine and lollipops, but I mean, it is. It's like very rewarding, and I love working for the community. I love interacting with people in the community. I love speaking to them about what it is that we do. And every single day for me is a new day to interact with somebody who has a question about what we do. And you know what? That's like key to the success of First Nation policing because people have access to us. I don't know how many chiefs of police are really accessible to the communities that they work in or that they work for. But here it's like everybody knows who I am, everybody knows where I live, and people are not shy. Like they'll come to my house on the weekends, they'll come early in the morning on Christmas Day, like whatever day. People are either knocking on my door or coming to my office or calling me, right? They have questions about what it is we do, and that makes us here much more accountable to our community, because we're always under that scrutiny, and it gives us the opportunity to understand and adapt the services that we're providing.
Definitely. And kind of building off of that. So, for those who might be listening who might not know, can you share with us the uniqueness that comes with being part of a First Nations police service? And, what differs the most from a First Nations police service against like a municipal or provincial police service?
Yeah, for sure. That's a great question, and I get that question often. I think the real difference is when we're interacting with our community, it's always about what it is that we can do as a service to our community. We're not saying like, we're here, this is our job, this is what you get. And because we're small, we have that agility to be able to adapt to whatever it is that's coming down the pipe, right? Like whatever it is that's happening, we can adapt our service and we can adapt what it is that we're doing when we interact with the community. And really and truly, like every day for us is a new day to build trust. And that's the only way that we've been able to really make leaps and bounds and changes for our community. And in First Nation policing, the one thing that we don't have a lot of resources.
Right.
So for us, we have to be creative about the way we provide those services to our communities because resources are always at a premium. And oftentimes, like we're shorthanded. We always have a lack of boots on the ground, if you will. And think about it like this. If you look at some other big services that are out there that exist in Canada, and there are some great ones, don't get me wrong, but I don't know how often you'll see the director or the chief of police actually out there doing regular patrols.
Right.
And for us here in First Nation policing, like that's a reality. There are times when we're shorthanded and like I'll put on all my gear and I'll go out there and I'll go on regular general duty patrols with other peacekeepers, just to be able to make sure that we're still able to field the best team possible. Because at the end of the day, our communities, like here in Kahnawake and definitely the rest of the country, they deserve good quality policing. And people are really adamant about that, especially here in our community. Like we're always under scrutiny, we're always under the microscope. People are always looking to make sure that we're doing what it is that we say we're doing.
From everything you just said, it really sounds like community is it's everything you guys do. They're like the most important thing.
Yeah, for sure. Like I mean, think about it. Part of your question was like, what's unique about what you do? Well, for one thing, here in Kahnawake, we really pride ourselves on fielding a team of peacekeepers who are reflective of the community that we serve. So we're really proud of the fact that we're one of the only First Nation police services in the country that's made up entirely of First Nation people.
Wow.
And the vast majority, I would say to the tune of about 95% of our peacekeepers live in the community, right? Obviously we all work here, but we all live in the community and everybody knows where we live. They know where our homes are. Like there's no such thing as being anonymous.
Yep.
And because everyone knows you, it puts you in a position where when you're providing service, you're working extra hard. You're going to go that extra mile, right, to be able to provide a good service. And some of the other things that are unique here is like we don't have street names, we don't have door numbers, so it's really, really incumbent upon peacekeepers to really know and understand the community. Like, we have to know where every single person in our community lives. And some people are like, oh, well, maybe it's a First Nation community, maybe it's small, maybe there's only a couple of hundred people that live there. Well, here in Kahnawake, like we're in a unique situation, and we're one of the only First Nation services in the country that has this unique situation. So from where I sit now, I'm about 5 minutes away from being in downtown Montreal. So we're on the South Shore, just across the bridge
Yeah.
from Montreal. So we have about 130,000 people a day commuting through our territory. So when they're here in our community, we're responsible for their safety and security. And at the same time, when you think about the things that we do, like there are so many impacts on what it is we're doing. And that means, as I said earlier, like we always have to find creative ways about providing those services. And the community itself, the population here is about 10,000 people.
Hmm.
So it really is quite unique when you become a peacekeeper and you start providing services to the community. There aren't street names, there's no door numbers. How do you find it, right? Like you really have to understand the community you're working in.
Is it ever difficult knowing all of the members of your community and you live amongst them? So it could be your friends or your family who you do have to ensure that they know the law and they are, not breaking the law. Is it ever difficult for your members in that situation?
Yeah, it's extremely difficult. I mean, that's a key to it, right? That's one of the biggest things that we hear from any First Nation police service. When you're doing this job, when you choose to be in service to your community, the reality is you're very likely to deal with community members who are related to you, who you've known for a very long time. Maybe you went to high school with that person, or I mean, you could have started grade school and gone up through all the grades with this person sitting in a desk next to you. Like that's just a reality. And then if you have your own family, you have children, they're in sports, whatever it may be, hockey, lacrosse, that type of thing. When you're going to these sporting events, you're seeing all the people that you dealt with earlier in the day or in the evening or the night before, and like you're always under scrutiny, right? Even when you're off, you're not really off. So that pressure is always there, and we're always trying to find ways to manage the mental health of our peacekeepers too, because truly we are always in a situation where we're fairly short-handed. So making sure that people are ready, willing, and able to show up for their shifts and provide the best service is a key for us.
Now, I'd like to talk about the latest Supreme Court decision made in favor of the Mash Police Service. Can you share with us a bit about what the issue was and what brought it to the Supreme Court?
Yeah, absolutely. So that community filed their complaint against Quebec and Canada. It was in relation to deficits that they found their community in because the policing agreement that they had signed for didn't provide the resources that were necessary for them to be able to provide the services that they need year over year from a certain period of time. And at the end of the policing agreement, they were in a massive deficit, like $1.5 million or so.
Right.
And it was left up to the community to have to pay out of pocket for that. And they felt as though the funding partners, the federal government and the provincial government, didn't negotiate fairly and honestly when they were doing it. And at the end of the day, the funding partners said, "No, we're not going to pay. We're not on the hook for those dollars." So they filed their complaint. They went to court, and had originally lost the court case, but appealed it. On appeal, it was turned over, and it was found that um, the funding partners actually were responsible for paying to ensure that the deficits were covered. Um, Once that happened, once there was a finding against the federal government and the Quebec government, the federal government kind of said, "Okay, we're just going to pay our share. We understand what the court is saying." On the other hand, though, the province of Quebec said, "Nope, we're going to appeal this. We don't feel that we're responsible for that." It went to the Supreme Court of Canada, and the Supreme Court of Canada upheld the decision that like you are on the hook for it, and at the same time, like the way you negotiated kind of brought the reputation of the crown into disrepute kind of thing, right? So going forward, the federal and provincial governments are, I believe, going to be under a lot of scrutiny to do a better job when it comes to making these negotiations.
Of course. And this has been described as like a landmark decision. And I'd love to get your opinion on, what it might mean for the future of First Nations policing in Canada.
Right. So I mean, I have to go back a little bit because I've been involved in First Nation policing for nearly 30 years now,
Mhm.
and in that time, we've always lobbied, we've always advocated for First Nation policing to become recognized as an essential service,
Mhm.
and that hasn't happened yet. In 2019, the Prime Minister of Canada sent his mandate letter to the Public Security Minister. And in that mandate letter, it said it's time to make First Nation policing, it's time to recognize them as an essential service.
Yeah.
But that was way back in 2019. And here we are in 2024 on the cusp of, a new year. And we still haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah.
And if you read like the Auditor General reports, the most recent one, and even past reports, it talks about how the First Nation policing program, now known as the First Nation and Inuit policing program, how it's always left a lot to be desired when it comes to providing resources to First Nation policing and to the communities that they serve. Well, I mean, over the years, incrementally, things have improved, right? So I don't want to paint a picture where it's all doom and gloom, but in all honesty, like it's been glacially slow.
Yeah.
Like it hasn't changed that much. It hasn't really been fast tracked like we thought it would be way back in 2019. And remember, in 2019, that's already 20, 25 years of us asking for this recognition, for these changes to happen. The First Nation policing program started in 1991. So it's still like fairly new in comparison. And if you look at the First Nation services that exist now, there are 36 across the country. Um, all of those services, or the vast majority of them, have existed at least from 1991, or even beyond or before. And like here in Kahnawake, the Kahnawake Peacekeepers, we started in 1979, and we're one of the oldest First Nation police services in the country. And we actually do predate this program, and whatever it is they develop to funnel resources our way. And when we look at the things that have happened over the years, we've had this really big time of growing pains, and in that period of time, if you think about it, like for us, 40 some odd years, we've had to grow and expand, whereas some of the big services in this country have had 150 or even 200 years of existence, and everybody looks at us and scrutinizes us, and sometimes like we really and truly feel like we're being regarded with benign neglect. And so it's really difficult. Anyway, over the years, like there have been incremental adjustments to help us to continue to for lack of a better way of saying, to survive. Like we're not in a position where we're actually stabilized. It's always about survival. And that's why I mentioned earlier, like we always have to find a creative way of continuing to exist. And it makes it extremely difficult when your funding comes through a program measure, because you only exist for as long as your policing agreement is signed for.
Yeah.
Some communities sign for a year. Some communities are extensions 1 year after 1 year after 1 year. Like how do you expand? How do you grow? How do you strategically figure out what the next steps are? And
Yeah.
for us in First Nation policing, our goal, like I'm not going to be here forever, right? And in my time that I am here, I would like to leave something that's lasting, something that's going to make a difference in our communities, because First Nation communities deserve, equal professional services just like any other place.
Yeah.
And really, for all of us, the goal is to build something for the future, because really that's what the First Nation policing program was supposed to do. Now, as I mentioned earlier, it's known as First Nation Inuit Policing Program. It was supposed to build First Nation policing. It was supposed to help expand it, and it hasn't done that at all. Like everything has been, how do we survive? What do we do next year? How do we get to where we need to go? Like, what is it that we need to do? And with this Supreme Court of Canada decision, our hopes are that the government will sit up and take notice finally and say, you know what, we have to do a better job. When it comes time to providing funding, when it comes time to providing the resources that they need, in First Nation communities, let's really look at what they really need in their communities, so that way we can help them to get to where they need to be. It's not always about, well, this is what you get, or this is all we're going to give you. First Nation policing becomes extinct. Who's going to fill that gap? Like, who's going to do it? And at what cost? Like, think about the cost, because they're getting us, and they have been getting us for pennies on the dollar in comparison. So what is it going to cost if somebody else fills those gaps that we leave if we become extinct? And it's not a knock on anybody, but I mean, some services are not, some mainstream services, for lack of a better way of describing them, they're not equipped to provide services the way we do, and in the conditions that we provide them in, right? Some of their members are going to be like, what is this? Like, what did I get myself into? Like, honestly, some services here in Quebec for years and years and years, they didn't have enough patrol cars to go around. They didn't have enough tools, whether it was sidearms or bulletproof vests. They were taking hand-me-downs. Like, who would work in those kind of conditions?
Yeah.
And long hours, and sometimes you're the only officer on duty. and you got to respond to every single call that is received by your service. And then when you're supposed to be off, you can't be off because there's no one else to do the job. So you're in this constant flux, right? Like, what do you do? And the stressors and all of those things, like, it really is an impact.
Yeah.
And if First Nation policing becomes extinct, believe me, there's going to be no such thing as public security in this country. Like, there can't be. There's
Yeah.
no such thing as national security without First Nation policing being able to do the job that they're tasked to do in their communities.
And what would it mean to you and your abilities to help lead your peacekeeping team if you were now recognized as a essential service?
Yeah, I mean, I I'm laughing a little bit because I've actually dreamed about that quite a lot. Like, what would it look like? How would it be? How much easier would it be? You
Yeah.
know, like, in my role as a chief peacekeeper, I have to make the budgets. I have to make up the decisions about how things are going to be done in our community. I have a board that I'm responsible to. I have a chief and council that I have to be accountable to as well. And at the end of the day, I'm accountable to all of the members of the Kahnawake Peacekeepers, and their safety and security, just like the safety and security of our community, is paramount to me. Like, that, really, like, that's what it comes down to. And how do we be everything to everyone,
Mhm.
especially in a situation where our resources are less, or a percentage of what someone else might be getting? Like, it makes it extremely difficult. And I think for us, becoming recognized as an essential service means that we're going to be able to build into the future, right? And as our community grows and expands, just like other First Nation communities, just like communities in this country, we're going to be able to answer the call for service when we're needed. And right now, it makes it extremely difficult. And we're always trying to find ways of, like, stopgap measures, if you will, to be able to do that. And we can't do that anymore because the impact on our human resources is great. And I think if things change for the positive, we'll be able to do all of the strategic planning that we always talk about. Succession planning will be much easier because
Mhm.
right now we don't have the people to be able to manage big turnovers and change. Think about it on a day-to-day basis here. We have 36 peacekeepers in our community, and we're managing 10,000 community members as well as 130,000 commuters a day.
Yeah.
And at any given time, we have a finite amount of peacekeepers doing general duty policing. If one peacekeeper calls in sick or gets injured or is on vacation, that's like 30% of our workforce that's not available for use.
Yeah.
So, like, we really have to make some positive changes. And over the years, like I said before, it's been like glacially slow. And we need this big changes to happen now because safety and security is paramount for our community. And I mean, in our particular case, we're also providing services to community members or members of different communities passing through our territory.
For any potential parliament member or, anyone at federal level, provincial level who might actually listen to this podcast, what would you want to share with them to really show them what you guys are going through?
Yeah, I think what I would want them to hear is that, just imagine if it was the community they were living in. What kind of service would they want for themselves and for their family, or for people that they knew and cared about, right?
Mhm.
And why should a First Nation community expect less? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
our communities are entitled to the best services possible. And think about it. We're not saying, no, no, we got enough. No, no, we don't want to get better. We're saying we want to be better. We
Yeah.
want to get better. We want to improve. We want to be able to increase service to our community. Like, to me, that says it all. Like, we want to improve. And
Yeah.
our community knows that. And I said it earlier, like, every day for us is a new day to build trust with our community. And if we did a good job today, we can't just sit back, and go, well, we did a good job yesterday. It doesn't work that way. It really is truly like, what did you do for me lately? And we always think of it from that perspective. How can we be better every day? How can we be better?
That's amazing. And I think you really hit the nail on the head there. It's like you guys want to continue to grow and be better for the people you're serving. Like you're not just trying to sit back saying, yeah, we're fine. So I
No,
think that's a
exactly.
lot.
That's exactly it. We want to be better.
To wrap up our podcast here, I'd just love to know, in your opinion, what's the most important thing for others to understand about First Nations police services?
I think I think people need to understand that First Nation policing, even though we struggle, even though it's been hard to survive as long as we have, and you know what? We're not going anywhere. We're going to continue to survive because the service that we provide to our communities is vital. And if you think about it, safety and security is a building block. How do you improve education and health and housing and all of these things if you don't have communities that are stable?
Mhm.
And the government will always talk about it and say, well, we've been helping them with these stabilization funds. Well, they have, and as I said before, it's been very slow. And over the years, like I can see that things are changing and they're changing for the better every day, but it's so, so slow. And with the Supreme Court of Canada decision and all of these things, I'm cautiously optimistic.
Mhm.
I want to be more optimistic, but it's hard because I've been doing this for a long time, and it seems like at every turn we've always been thwarted or like knocked back a couple of pegs, but we're not going to give up, and it's important to each and every one of us in our communities to be able to provide, like quality living to our members. Think about it from your own family perspective. What do you want for your family, right? Here in our communities, we want it for everybody in our community.
Mhm.
And of course, visitors to our community, they deserve the same thing. So all we're looking for is to be treated fairly and equally so we can expand just like anybody else and be able to provide for our communities. We don't want to be regarded as second-class citizens anymore.
Of course. And what I've heard before in talking to other First Nations police leaders is you guys also respond in a culturally appropriate way as well for your community. And I think
Oh, for
that's
sure. Like, I mean, that's the key to our existence. And when I'm talking about building trust, like people will only trust us if they know that the service that they're gonna receive is culturally appropriate, and going back to some of my points earlier, that's the reason why we build the Kahnawake Peacekeepers the way we do. That's why we're so proud of being one of the only First Nation police services that's made up entirely of First Nation people. We have a lived experience, right? We
Mhm.
understand what it's like to live and work in a First Nation community.
Dwayne, I just want to say thank you so much for joining me on today's episodes. First Nations police services are, like you said, such an important part of the Canadian policing landscape. And I'm honored to have been able to chat with you about it today. And I just want to say thank you again.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity. I really do hope that people listen to what we've talked about today, and I really am cautiously optimistic for the future.
For everyone who tuned in today, we hope you enjoyed this episode of Blue Line the Podcast. You can check us out on SoundCloud, Spotify, iTunes, or wherever else you get your podcasts. You can also stay up to date on all of your Canadian policing news at blueline.ca. Until next time, stay safe and be well.